Welcome, everybody, all our Rochester Community School students and families that are out there today. Welcome to our fifth RCS Music Virtual Lecture Series. Really excited to host today. My name is David Uhrig. I'm the band director at Rochester High School. And we have with us a very special guest, Mr. Andrew David Perkins, a good friend of mine. He is a teacher in Michigan, and I'll let you tell him a little about that, a composer, and also a graduate of Rochester Community Schools. So welcome, Andy. Thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me. This is an honor.
Excellent. So I guess we'll get right into it so we can start sharing all the information about you. Would you just talk to us about your experience in music in the Rochester Community Schools growing up here?
Yeah, absolutely. My family moved to Rochester when I was in fourth grade, so I went to Brewster Elementary School, Brewster Bulldogs, and my mom was actually a music teacher at Baldwin Elementary, and she also taught at Musson for a while as well. And so, I jumped right in fourth grade, and I did all of the summer music theater program stuff, which was just fantastic, like huge impact on my life with all of the summer music theater stuff. I did that from fifth grade through 12th grade in all the summers, and started playing trombone with Tom Bloom in fifth grade, and went to Van Hoosen. Bill Walters was my band director, great guy, and went to Adams High School. Denny Freilich was my band director, and Denny was really important, obviously, in my junior and senior year, kind of sending me in the direction to be a music educator and conductor and composer. So yeah, all around, between Denny Freilich and Tim Lentz and Stacey Harris and the theater, choir, band programs at Adams and Van Hoosen, I just had a stellar experience.
Excellent. And I think I remember, if I remember quickly, our choir teacher at Rochester High School, Catherine Likens, was Catherine Steen. Then I think she was in The King and I with you. Is that right?
Yeah, we did some shows together once we kind of looked back and realized we had crossed paths quite a bit.
Excellent. Well, what kind of made you decide to pursue music in your career? You touched on a little bit some of your influences in high school, but what made you really make sure that was a passion of yours that you wanted to pursue?
Well, I sort of had to pick a passion. Everyone has to, at some point at the end of high school, at least have a direction, or a university or college or a technical training path that they want to go on. And I was super in love with filmmaking and acting and conducting. I wanted to possibly be an orchestra conductor. That was sort of one of my big dreams. I went to Interlochen a couple summers with the All-State Orchestra after my junior and senior year, and really fell in love with the idea of being an orchestra conductor, a professional orchestra conductor. And the reality of that is obviously very different, but the deep down idea of standing in front of a group of people and leading them through a magical musical moment was like deeply seated in there. And it sort of made sense that being a high school band director was a pathway to do that, or to live that experience. And I also just really looked up to Denny Freilich, and saw his career and what he got to do for a living, and thought that's amazing, and I'd love to do that. And a lot of other people too. Obviously my mom's a music educator, and so she encouraged me to do that. And she knew that the conducting and composing side of things were parallel careers, and that if I did the music education route, that it would open a lot of doors for that as well. So, sending me directly into film school in Los Angeles was just a little too crazy for them. And so it seemed like, bringing it back to music education was like a little more sane option. And I also, at that point, had fallen in love with the Spartan Marching Band. So once that sort of happened, I was like, oh, I have to go do this now, because I'm really, really, really fascinated with this place and this particular band.
Excellent. Well, that leads right into the next thing I wanted to ask, is just kind of talk about your experience in college with music and drum corps. And obviously you mentioned the Spartan Marching Band. If you could kind of touch on your experiences there.
Sure. That's the thing about, I grew up in sort of a U of M family, if you will, and had really wanted to attend the University of Michigan, and loved their marching band and their music program, and had friends there, and sort of realized early high school that academically that wasn't going to happen for me. And this is obviously, it's a long time ago. But my grades weren't where they needed to be to really head towards the University of Michigan. And they really honestly were barely where they needed to be to head towards Michigan State at the time. I mean, at this point, I wouldn't get into either of those schools as a incoming freshman, but at the time, Michigan State was a little more realistic. And I actually had this big moment um, when I was at Interlochen between my junior and senior years. I have my walk going. I had my headphones on my Walkman going, and I had a tape of the University of Michigan marching band. And I used to listen to that thing, just flip it, play it, flip it, play it, flip it on repeat. Loved it. I loved it, just the huge sound and just sort of the atmosphere. And my cabin counselor was like, "Hey, what are you listening to?" And I was like, "Oh, it's the University of Michigan marching band. Super cool." And he was like, "Dude, let me play you something." And he was in the Spartan marching band. And so he like pulled out this tape, and I hadn't ever been to Michigan State, and I hadn't experienced that. And obviously both of these are world-class universities, world-class band programs with deep histories and, really amazing directors and programs. And when I kind of heard that sound of the Spartan marching band, and he showed me his band jacket, and I looked up to this guy. He was a really cool guy, and he started telling me about like what that experience was like. That led me a couple weeks later to go to campus on Michigan State. And once I got on campus, I was sold. It was just one of those things where, I knew instantly, like, I need to be in this place. I need to be in that band. I need to do whatever I need to do. And that was like, fall of my senior year. And I was not a great trombone player. I mean, I had a really good ear, but I hadn't studied privately. And so I went to my band director and I said, "Hey, I really want to do this." And he's like, "Then you need to go take lessons right now at Oakland." And he set me up with private lessons at Oakland University and worked my butt off because I had really relied on my ear like forever, and was not a great reader. And I could only play maybe 5 scales. And I wasn't ready. So in like 3 months, I learned everything you need to learn, all 12 scales and a bunch of etudes, and got ready really fast. Got lucky, had a great audition at Michigan State, and had a really good audition, an oral audition too. They did that thing. I don't know if they did this for you, but they did a thing where they'll play chord sequences and ask you to sing it back or name the notes back. And so they were really impressed with that. And then they had me actually come and sit down at the piano, and they wanted to see where I was with that. And it turned into this fun sort of improv thing. And they offered me a scholarship. So that felt like this is where you need to go. This is the right choice. So I went 5 years at Michigan State, music education. Um, Snuck in some writing there, although I kind of got slapped on the hand a little bit for it. Like in my senior recital, I played one French trombone etude that was like required. And then I wrote a piece for trombone and piano that was super weird, and I played that. And then I arranged a different a brass ensemble, and asked all my friends to play this arrangement that I did. So it was one of those things where I sort of snuck in the composition that I wanted to do in a music education thing. But again, just incredible experience at Michigan State. Really difficult, really challenging. I mean, any music major is like 150 credits, or I mean, it's really, really pushing it. So that was good. After a couple of years of teaching, I went to University of Michigan. Again, amazing experience. I got a little bit harassed, for being a Spartan graduate and coming down to Ann Arbor, but everybody got over that pretty quick. And another amazing experience there. It was music education again. I did my master's in music education, but while I was there, I was able to beg Jim to pog me for some composition lessons. So I did a little bit of that, and then that really started to open the door into to more composing and arranging and saying like, I really want to do this. So that was back in 2006-7 when I was doing my master's at Michigan. And then after that, I was still teaching public school, and really, really got interested in formally studying this. So I started taking online classes through Berkeley. Berkeley has a really cool online music program where you can actually get certificates. So I earned a certificate in orchestration in 2012. I finished that, and then shortly after that, 2013 was when I formally created a publishing company and started putting my music out there. And then there's just sort of been this exponential growth since then.
Well, thanks for sharing all that information. You covered a lot of the questions I was going to ask there. Um, we have students here today, band students, orchestra students, choir students as well, listening in. You touched a little bit about your kind of passion for orchestra initially. What's your experience with that? I know you work with the community orchestra and compositionally. What have you been doing?
Well, in high school, I played in the Oakland Youth Orchestra, and that was a great experience. Sort of my first orchestral experience as a trombone player. Um, and then I spent those 2 summers at Interlochen doing the All-State program, the All-State Orchestra with Larry Livingston, conductor, which was like that was sort of that big moment junior year where I was like, I want to be a conductor, and and falling in love with that repertoire and that sound and the full symphony orchestra. Um, and the only string instruments I played were like guitar and bass. um, so I wasn't a string musician. I wasn't a string player. Um, and then I eventually, after I've been teaching for about 10 years, a community orchestra started in the city of Fenton, and they, used our space to rehearse in. And then at the end of the first season, the board of directors asked me to become the conductor, and I was happy to do that. And the first time I got in front of a symphony orchestra instead of a wind band was a little bit strange, just to kind of shift gears a little bit and realize that the way that the music is written for an orchestra, the balances and the articulations, a lot of the things translate, but some things don't, especially articulation and duration and decay. But that was really great for me because it was such a learning experience, and it was mostly adults. It was people who had played string instruments when they were younger, sort of in the heyday of school orchestra, in the 60s. And they came back to play. And so I learned an incredible amount. And I had people who were really responsive to my conducting too. So that was a thrill. And I've been doing that ever since. We're about to figure out what we're doing for our 11th season
Yeah,
of the Fenton Community Orchestra. So yeah, I've been conducting that group for a decade.
awesome. And I know you have a piece that was recently written, Bauhaus for orchestra, right?
Yes, I wrote that was a commission for the MSBOA All State Honors Middle School String Orchestra, and that premiered just this past January at the conference.
Excellent. So that's really exciting to hear because we're growing our orchestra program in Rochester. It's in sixth and seventh grade right now. It'll be in eighth grade, and then it'll be at the high schools in a couple of years. So
That's
that's
awesome.
exciting to see. And I'll have to pick your brain because if I have an orchestra class,
You should probably
congratulations
pick
on.
actual string pedagogues' brains first. I mean, I will write something for you, but um, I am not your string, pedagogy guy.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, so you talked a little about how you got into composition. Can you share a little bit with our students, like how they might explore composition as a young musician, maybe middle school, high school? What kind of things might they explore if they're interested in getting into that?
Sure. I'm a big advocate of music education as a path to being a composer. So, people ask me this question a lot, and I have the very long answer and I have the short answer. But the short answer is that historically, musicians were not broken down into these little subcategories. A musician was a musician. They were a whole musician. They performed and they composed and they taught and they arranged and they theorized, all those different things. And then it's only really in the last century or so that we have these very specific subcategories of, I'm a performer and I have a degree in performance, and I have a master's degree in performance, and I have a doctorate in performance, or I'm a music educator and that's what I do, or, this, that, and the other. So I think that music education is the broadest. And so by studying music education, you're going to take your methods classes, you're going to learn how to play all the instruments, which is super, super important to being able to write well for them, is to actually have your hands on the instrument and do it. And that also means singing in a choir. If you're an instrumentalist and you've never done that, you must sing in a choir. Music education means score study. It means that you're there tearing apart scores and looking at how things work and how they don't work and how they're put together. It means networking. You're making friends with all kinds of other potential band, orchestra, and choir directors. Um, it's just one of those really broad fields that helps you become such a better composer later. And it's not to say that you can't go straight into studying composition. You can obviously do that, but knowing it from a working standpoint instead of a theoretical standpoint is so valuable. If I'm writing something for seventh grade band, let's say, then it's really valuable that I've been a middle school band director and I know, okay, my seventh grader is going to have a hard time going from B to C. So I'm not going to want to write something that goes from B to C super fast or over and over and over. I'm going to want to approach that intelligently and carefully and maybe not pick B to C. There's probably a different choice I could do at a particular moment. Or those little things about, because, and I would know that because I've watched seventh graders struggle with that. So music education has a lot of pieces of it that will let you be a really fantastic composer if you also sort of feed that on the side. But I would say, other than studying music education, if you don't want to do that, don't do that. Start small, write what you know. If you play an instrument, write for that instrument. If you sing, write for voice. If you have friends that play instruments or sing, write for them, 2 or 3 voices, little short things. Get it performed and listen to their feedback. If you write something for your friend who plays a trumpet and they're like, "Yo, I can't play that note. That's like 2 octaves too high," or "I can't play 30-second notes. It doesn't work." So you listen to them and take that feedback and actually apply it. And then start changing elements, start changing the melody and the harmony and the rhythm and the texture and the timbre. You don't need to write this gigantic symphony. I think it's a little terrifying for your first thing that you go to write is to have this grand vision and say, I'm going to write this gigantic, I'm going to go write the planets. Slow down. Like, just write something small and have it sort of succeed in a tiny way, and that'll feel really good. And then expand on that and make it longer, or expand on the instrumentation. um, and then steal everything. I mean, there's so much content now that is just on the internet waiting for you to look it up. If you Google how to orchestrate this in 3 voices, it's there. If you Google how does the saxophone work, it's there. Like, everything is there basically for free. So if you have patience and time, there's really no excuse. Like, you just need to kind of find it and look it up. That was my experience when I started writing for strings. I was not very secure about a lot of double stops and about moving fingers from string to string and about positions. And so I asked all my friends. I was like, "Hey, does this work? How does that work? Would it be better to do this? Why wouldn't I do this?" And listen to my string friends, feedback, and then Google it. Um, and obviously, if you have the means to do it and the opportunity to study formally, go for it. That's great too. I'm a huge believer in academia. So if you're going to actually study, go study. But pairing it with real world application is super valuable as well. Some people will like to, I'm going to get a bachelor's degree in composition, and I'm going to go straight into my master's, and then I'm going to go into this DMA or PhD program. And that's a lot of school when you could just actually go out and be doing it. I know plenty of people who are very successful composers who've written a ton of music that gets performed, and they don't have multiple degrees in composition or even music. So yeah,
Awesome.
just
Thanks.
write.
Yeah,
Oh, and
thanks.
get a mentor. Get a mentor. Get like 10 mentors. Get like a bunch of composers and people and friends who do it, and be like, "Hey, how did you do that?" The worst they're going to say is nothing, or like, "Sorry, I can't help you out." But I promise you they won't. That people love to talk about what they do and what they love. So,
That's great. Yeah, thanks. I know the current Adams director, Mr. Furman, he does a little arranging. The former West director, Bob Kroll, he's done some composing and whatnot. So there's definitely local folks that.
yeah, Jim is amazing. I mean, Jim Furden is crazy talented. So yeah, if you're at Adams and Mr. Furden and you're interested in arranging and composition and you're not asking him, I don't know what else to tell you.
All right, great. So if you would talk to us next, maybe about your compositional process, like what kind of things inspire you? How do you go about like getting started? Do you have a melody in your head, or kind of like what's the
Mhm.
process of going through putting a piece together for you?
Um, yeah, you know what? Real quick, I'm gonna let my cat up the stairs because she's freaking out, and if she's just gonna keep crying and yelling. So like, give me 2 seconds.
Yeah, yeah, we're watching her behind you walk around. While he's doing that, we got to give a shout out to Mr. Toma way down in Sanibel, Florida. He's watching a former Rochester High School band director. So
Oh, awesome!
good to see Mr. Toma watching the live feed here.
I can't see you, Augie, but nice to know you're there. Yeah, Augie is awesome, big supporter. Same thing when I was growing up, going to Adams. I really looked up to those guys. I looked up to Denny and I looked up to Augie, and They had great programs and they had a wealth of knowledge about literature and repertoire. And so it was really cool to have their mentorship. Mentors is huge. You've got to have people who know what they're doing and are happy to share it. Okay, so you asked about process, right?
Yep.
My process, for the most part, is very polyphonic, meaning that I will write line by line. So whether that first line is a melody, then I will usually get some sort of um, framework of the melody, and then I will start writing individual lines. So polyphonically, meaning multiple lines of music, as opposed to the idea of writing, homophonically, where you've got a melody and then chords underneath that move along with it. That works too. It's just a different way to go. So I usually will write and add lines in one by one that complement each other. And so the harmonic structure comes from the way that those multiple lines interact with each other as time passes. That just seems to be the one that works for me. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people will write a chord sequence they really like first and then find a melody that works with that chord sequence. That's perfectly fine too. Some people will write from a rhythmic standpoint and kind of lay down like a beat or find some sort of sequence that works for them rhythmically and then find chords that fit the beat and then, melodic content from there. But mine is pretty much all about adding lines until it's fully fleshed out. And I just let my ears tell me sort of when that seems that particular idea is fully fleshed out. I also tend to orchestrate while I write, which, again, it's just a choice. There's not a right or wrong way to do that. But most of the time, if I have a particular idea and I'm trying to put down that first line, then the actual instrument choice matters because it's going to have an impact on the register. So, what instrument is playing is going to tell me, well, is that a really high voice or a medium voice or a low voice? And that will affect all the other lines. So, if let's just say that I randomly start out with an idea for an oboe melody, then right there, it's that oboe is going to take up a particular sonic space, both in pitch and in color. And that is already telling me where I can put those other lines to complement it. So if I want it to be full and broad and supported, then I'm probably not going to surround that oboe with other oboes and trumpets because they're going to walk all over each other. So I might surround it with different timbres like flutes and clarinets. Or if I really wanted to make that oboe stand out, I could change the register and support it with like horns and trombones. So it's a different register and a different color. So I do that. I pick something and then I write around it, kind of like just whittling away at something until it looks and feels like, yeah, that's right, that's sculpted correctly. And I also tend to write chronologically. So usually the idea will lead to the next one, and I'll play around with these ideas, and then I'll usually step back and sort of look at all the ideas and sometimes then begin to move them around and say, wow, this idea that I had at the beginning, this would really be nice if I brought that idea back here and expanded it in a different way, a different voicing or different dynamics, or maybe now the whole orchestra is playing it in this big grand moment. So the ideas come chronologically, and then sometimes I'll steal from them and realize, like, if I take this thing from the end and move it over to the beginning or hint at it at the beginning, then when it comes back at the end, now you're like, oh, I remember that. That's cool. So I just sort of let it go, let the ideas come out, chip away at the 95% of garbage, and then whatever's left, I'm usually pretty satisfied with. But there's no wrong way to do it.
Excellent. Yeah, those are some great ideas. One of the students on the chat has a specific kind of rolls into what my next one was going to be. What inspired you? What inspires you to write pieces? And the specific question was, what inspired you to compose "The Raptor Rides the Whale"? It seems to be in the district here. A couple of the bands have played. I know one of mine, a few of the middle school groups have played it and listened to it.
Oh, cool. Um, so I can't really say what specifically inspires me, but I know that I can't write quality unless I'm inspired. So if there's an idea or an object or a place or a person or an event or a thing that captures my attention, like really, really captures my attention, then I'm probably going to write a band piece about it. And so the Raptor Rides the Whale is two things. One was the initial sound that I had discovered sort of screwing around with that inverted cymbal on a timpani head and a bow, just messing around and playing with noises. That's another bonus of being a band director. you have a room full of toys. So like, you can just stay after school and play around with stuff. Anyways, I was screwing around with cymbals and stuff. And that sound was fantastic. And it sounded like whale song. It sounded like this bizarre whale song when you move the pedal on the timpani. So there was that thing that I was waiting to use. And then there was this t-shirt that I saw on Pinterest by this artist. It was like a screen printed t-shirt by this artist named Sterling Prentice. He's actually Canadian. He lives in Saskatchewan. He's a librarian, and he's just like super eclectic and really interesting. And he had made this shirt of this velociraptor on the back of a whale, and it was just super fascinating. And I was like, that is a sweet shirt. So I bought the T-shirt because I thought it was cool, and I also thought that the Raptor Rides the Whale is a engaging title that is sort of strikes your imagination. Like, what is this bizarre scenario where an actual dinosaur would would go for a ride on a whale? Like, it's bizarre. um, and it's also kind of the goofy thing that when that piece of music gets set on your music stand and it says the Raptor Rides the Whale, everyone's reaction is immediately like, what is this going to be? Like a little bit amused and like sort of weirded out and intrigued, which is exactly what I want. I want just a little bit of intrigue. Like, I'm excited to hear what this sounds like. But then when I actually thought about it, I thought this has to sound like the music at the end of the video game level when you fight the boss. Like that's what it has to sound like. It has to be intense and exciting and a little bit bass, like a little bit just sort of like dumb rhythmically, don't, like ridiculously dumb music rhythmically, but interesting enough to be fun. So
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. I mean, when we played that a year ago, we put the image of the raptor riding the wheel up on the screen behind us
it's
on
great.
stage. Really cool for the audience to see that and get that visual. So that's really neat. Just we can also kind of loop in our choir folks into the conversation a little bit. You wrote the piece that Trip the Light Fantastic that the Rochester Band and Choir Kids got to perform this past fall.
Yeah.
Experience. Just kind of maybe talk about your experience for choir writing and anything you have with that.
Absolutely. That was my first big commission. Actually, that was from Jim Schuster at Davison High School, a good friend and great band director. He approached me in 2015 because they had a student who had passed away over the holiday break, and the student was a band and choir student. It's one of those kids that everybody loved and was just like, really into the program and involved in the theater and band and choir, and just one of those really tragic things. And so he wanted to commission this piece for the family and for the student, but he also didn't want it to be this requiem. He didn't want it to be this like really sad thing. He wanted to celebrate this kid's life and his energy and how funny he was and how excited he was about making music. Um, so I searched for a long time for um, the right text. Hang on a second. Sorry. Phone call. So I searched for a long time. Oh my gosh, technology. I hope you can't hear that. There we go. I searched for the text for a long time, and went through a bunch of different poems because I was really trying to find some imagery of just dancing through life. So I found this John Milton poem from forever ago, from like 1564, which means also the language was just incredible, the actual words and the imagery. But this idea of dancing through life and dancing on light, tripping the light, fantastic, is to dance in a light, nimble style. And the words were amazing about this summer day, enjoying this summer day and just soaking up the aesthetic experience of being out in nature on a beautiful day. And so, I tried to put that all together in a vibrant, exciting way, and I made it in an odd meter, alternating with the 7/8 and the 5/8. So it just sort of felt like a free form dance. And I tried a lot of different approaches. There are like 5 versions of Trip the Light that are garbage, that are wildly different from the final version. And that's one of those things again where when I came up with that final version, I was like, oh, this is it. It's very clear that this is the song. um, and that's what's composing is kind of terrifying sometimes, because until you find, for me at least, until you find that thing that says this is it, that's the melody, or that's the chord, or that's the song, it's really it can be desperate because your taste in your mind knows what it has to be. It has to be good. um, and when you're doing it right, I feel like for me there's this connection to this like source energy, and I'm not really writing it. I'm finally getting myself out of the way and everything else out of the way so that I can hear what it's supposed to be, because when I finally find it, it's like it's already been written and all I have to do is just write it down. It's like dictation. So there is really hard, and I wish I could tell you that there's a way to do that. There isn't, but there's a way to prepare for that and to have craft and to have skill so that when it happens, you're ready. So that when you finally have that idea or connect with that idea, you can have the skill set to quickly write it down or notate it in your phone or sing it or play it on the piano or whatever. That one was a trick. And that's only, you guys were the first group to do it with the full band and choir. Honestly, it's been played by band a bunch, but not with it's because it's a big job to put together the choir and the band. And it was gorgeous. I mean, that I made your recording at Rochester into the official like YouTube video for it because it was a great recording. So thank you for doing it justice.
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of fun to work on. And we love doing those collaborative things. I know all the high schools will do a collage concert of sorts and put the band in choir. We're always looking for good stuff to hard to find. And so when I stumbled upon that, I was like, this is the one we got to do this year. So it was
Yeah, thank you. It was great.
yeah. A question from our chat here, if you would. What was your favorite piece to write, or what did you have the most fun with?
Um, well, writing isn't super fun, but um hearing it played really is. So I don't know. I guess Clutch was not fun to write. Like it was so slow because it's so fast. The music goes by so fast and there's so many notes that I'd be working on it for like 4 days in a row and I would have a bar of music. So that was not fun to write. But when I hear it played, it is so fun to listen to because it's just pure energy. Um, I guess Asylum was fun to write because it's slow and pretty. So the experience of sitting and writing it was therapeutic, because just sitting and experiencing that slow, sort of beautiful music every night has an effect on you. So I guess that was fun to write, if you will. No, the most fun I had was recently with my newest piece that I just finished, which is the Tuabor Suite, the Michigan Folk Song Suite. That was fun because I spent a year listening to old recordings of actual Michiganders singing folk songs that they learned when they were kids. So these are like recordings from the 1930s of, old Michigan men who learned the song in the 1860s. And they're all online at the Library of Congress. You can hear Alan Lomax's collection of these old Michigan folk songs. So that was fun because it was listening to these old guys sing these folk songs all out of tune and terrible. And halfway through their recording, they just start like coughing up phlegm because they're smoking their pipe in the middle of this recording session. Just really interesting, funny to listen to old timey folk tunes. So I just finished that one. You can actually hear the whole thing on YouTube. That's called Tuabor. That's probably the most fun. I don't know. They're all fun in their own different way.
Neat. Yeah, we're looking forward to putting that performance together. I know we're hoping to do it in the fall, but who knows? We'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see what happens. Cool. Would you talk about your motivation? And I know this one was you talked to our students about a few years ago. Until the Night Collapses. I know that was a unique piece, and about a bit of a tragedy. Just to talk about why you had to write that piece.
Yeah, I mean, this is a messy one. There's no getting around that one. Essentially, it's an expression of my disillusionment with the idea of America as a standard bearer for liberty or freedom or equality or honor. Um, it began as this broad reaction to the disbelief of the 2016 election for me, and it kind of reached this tipping point after the 2017 Charlottesville neo-Nazi rally, and then again after the 2018 school shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, and like among 100 other awful events that happened within a 2-year period that were just completely breaking down my idea of America as this shining city on the hill. Um, this is why it's a messy one. It's very complicated material. Um, and I wanted to sort of crystallize my feelings about our societal struggles and draw people into the conversation in a way, that was going to change their ideas about nationalism and about isolationism and racism and sexism and fascism and idolatry of our, national symbols. And I wanted to use those patriotic motifs in a way that flipped them on their traditional use. And so, it's not a fun piece to put together to listen to, but I think it's an important piece because it's upsetting. So, when people hear it, they generally are disturbed by the use of the national anthem and these different patriotic themes in ways that are very dissonant and non-traditional. And that's the point, is to make you think about, well, why are you upset about that? What is it that disturbs you about hearing that melody played in a way that is not pretty and that is not beautiful? What does that mean necessarily about our country? And for me, it was to say that there are many, many, many things about our nation and our society that are deeply ugly, and we have to address that. Not to say that our country is not also a place of great beauty and pride and honor, but it doesn't have to be binary like that. There are realities, and we have to face them, and we have to do something about it. So that was, not fun to write. What broke that one for me was when I found the U2 song, the Sunday Bloody Sunday, to quote the melody in there, specifically the words to the melody. How long must we sing this song? How long is this going to go on? So, not a fun one, but also really super important. And I needed to write it just for me at the time. This is life.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I mean, that was a really powerful piece for us to put together and to perform. And I remember when you came and talked to our students, you said, this isn't something that I wanted to write. It's something that I had to write.
Yeah.
I just felt that. And that was really powerful to hear you say that. So we have some other questions here from the chat. Would you talk to us a little bit about gradients? I know one of my ensembles played that this year. We've had a couple other groups play that and enjoyed performing gradients.
Yeah, sure. Gradients was a really, to answer your question from a minute ago, that was actually a really fun one to write. That one came together super quick. That was right the summer right before and after when my daughter was born, Edith, who just went crying up the stairs. That was one of those ones where I had just a kind of a lightning bolt idea out of the blue of a descending musical line with the chords that went underneath it. And I went and immediately wrote it down. And that song wrote itself in like 3 days. It was just one of those things where, for whatever reason, I was in tune with the idea, and I heard it, and it immediately translated to what I was going to do. Sometimes I'll hear something in my mind and it does not translate at all, and it's just sort of a scrap that floats around. But that one was like, oh, perfect. This works perfectly. And guess what? It'll be really great to teach this concept, and it'll be really great to teach this G melodic minor scale, which is something you totally need to learn in 7th and 8th grade for proficiencies and stuff. So it was one of those things where it all kind of came together, and I was like, oh, this is like the perfect 8th grade band piece. And it just, it was a generally successful piece, and I submitted it for the National Band Association Alfred Publishing Young Band Contest, and it was selected, I think, probably for those reasons. So that was fun to write a good piece and to also, be given that award, because I got a phone call from Robert Sheldon, which was like super cool to have Robert Sheldon call you out of the blue. And it's cool when you have like one of your heroes out of the blue phone call you. I mean, I was like working on a Robert Sheldon piece with my kids at school, and then he calls me, and I was like, dude, it's Robert Sheldon. So that was pretty cool.
Awesome. Here's another question. This is from one of my trumpet players. He says, can you tell us a little bit about Clutch, the inspiration, the composition? That was one of the hardest and most unique songs to ever play. As we were rehearsing it, didn't get to perform it yet, hope to do it in the future. But, as a conductor, for me, I was listening to it like, oh, this is awesome. And then looking at it, I'm like, the kids are going to freak out. when they see this, because there's, you said it, there's just so many notes. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
You can see it
That
sitting
one
back there.
was like, I just wanted to see how far I could push it, you know? And without like crashing into the wall and burning up in a ball of flames and just keeping it together. So, when I was a kid, my dad used to take me down to Belle Isle to the IndyCar races. And I have like really strong memories of that, of the sounds of those cars and, zipping by at like 140 miles an hour and just that Doppler effect, the smells and the gasoline and just the whole experience and how cool sonically the experience was of IndyCar racing, because it's so loud and it's so fast and it's just dangerous, ridiculously dangerous. So, that was a cool thing, an experience I had with my dad when I was a kid that was just memorable for me. And I wanted to, it's dedicated, the piece is dedicated to my dad. And so I wanted to put this together. And so I had the idea for it. And then I met John Sizarowski, who's the Grand Ledge band director and a great guy, at a band director party. And, he was like, "Hey, I've been looking for someone to write a fanfare." And I was like, "Hey, I've got this idea for this crazy, fast, ridiculous fanfare. And I want to call it Clutch." And for a number of reasons, like I already had the title and he was like, "Oh, I love that title. I'm in." And so he commissioned it solo, just them. And they premiered it last December and rocked it. And then very quickly, a bunch of other schools jumped jumped on it, and Michigan State played it at the CBDNA North Central a couple months after that, and a bunch of other high schools played, and then a bunch of other high schools went to go program it like you guys and started working on it, and then the whole world blew up. So that piece is important to me, not only because it's dedicated to my dad, but I also wanted to see how many notes and how much ridiculousness can I cram into 3 minutes of music. I just wanted to like sort of, if there's going to be one piece you're going to listen to, if you've never heard my music before, start with that, because I want people to hear that and think, okay, this is everything this guy has just thrown at you in a few seconds. So it wasn't fun to write because it was so many notes and figuring out how do I cram it all into um, you know, a half of a second of linear time and still have it be audible, because it can be just a mess because everything's going by so fast. And then the second half was, after I wrote it, I had to write it down. I had to notate it, and figuring out how to notate that stuff in, what, first of all, what even time signature is this in? If it's a bar of 12/8, how are we subdividing that? Because there's some people who are going 3/3/3/3, and there's some people going 3/2/2/2, and 2/2/2/3, and then a couple people are going 3/3/3. It's just, it's like the weirdest. And then a couple people are just doing like a 2-octave chromatic run over the space of 12 beats. So that took a long time to write down, and that was a challenge for me musically too, because that was fun for me to like, how do I write this down to make sense to someone who has to actually play it? Because computers are nice, but people are real. So yeah, it was fun, but a challenge.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been fun to work on. Some of the kids they're just like shaking their heads, probably freaking out, but once they get into it and start working on it, I think
Yeah, it's okay to hate it. Like, you can look, as a player, if I looked at it, I would look at what was on the page and I'll be like, I hate this. This is ridiculous. But if you can get past what it looks like, listen to the recording and sort of feel what that's supposed to be like as a phrase, it'll make sense.
awesome. Another question we had from the chat here: are you composing something currently? What will the name be, or names? And yeah, what are you kind of working on right now?
Well, I just finished the score for Tuabor, because I'll write it and then I have to transcribe it. So I literally just finished that score and it's being proofed right now, by a couple different directors. And then, so I'm done with that and I haven't started anything new yet. What I am doing is exploring a new notation program. So I'm switching to Dorico Pro, which is, I've been using Sibelius for 2 decades, and Dorico I've been looking at for a while. And it's one of those things where I have my whole workflow is set up in one program, and I've been waiting for a chance to have some time to switch over. And right now it's like, look, this is your chance. There's nothing going. Um, so I'm going to be working on not necessarily a piece, but learning a new tool that hopefully will speed up my workflow and, let me work faster. But next on my list as actual music that I want to write is a piece called Empire Bluff, which um, is about a very specific place in up north Michigan, which is kind of one of the most beautiful places on earth, and a place that we were supposed to go hang out this summer and, have s'mores on the beach. And whether or not we get to do that, you know, is yet to be seen. So if I don't get to do that, then at least I get to write music about what it feels like to think about doing that. So that's next. And then I have a piece that I keep delaying. It's called Horror Vacui, which is the idea of the fear of empty spaces. And so musically, I was going to fill it with just like really dense, spooky music. And I'm trying to keep that one like grade 2, 3. So basically, it's a Halloween piece in 3 short movements, like 3 1-minute movements about vampires and werewolves and ghosts, using every bizarre, spooky thing that wind band instruments can do. So I've, 3 Halloweens have passed in a row where I've been like, this is the year I'm going to, have it done and put it out for Halloween. And it hasn't happened. So we'll see what happens. I don't even know if we're going to, if we go back in person, have face-to-face band this fall, and I know that's coming, then maybe that's motivation to finish it. But if we're going to be in a hybrid situation, like a lot of people are talking about, we'll see how that all plays out. But so yeah, I'm going to work on those. And then I've got a couple of actual commissions that people want to pay me to write that are lined up too. And that kind of tends to happen with composers. Is there's usually like a wait list of, people have stuff in the queue that they're actually working on. So when directors approach composers that they want to work with, usually there's a working knowledge going in that it might be 2, 3, 4 years before the piece is produced. Like I know we've talked, Dave, about there's a centennial coming up, right? Or is it 150 years or 100 years of Rochester High School?
Well, actually, that was the Oakland County bicentennial.
Oh, that's what that
It was
was.
March. We were going to play Clutch there. Yeah. That's got bumped to hopefully the fall. So they just kind of postponed it. So we'll see. That's
okay.
Still in the works. Yeah. Cool. Like there was another question. Sorry, I got stuck here for a second. What are some of the tools that you have when you're about to write out a big idea? I don't know if it's like technology wise or what kind of things you use.
Sure. Yeah. So I do all my sketching on my phone. So I just use the voice recorder app because I can sing an idea faster than any other way into my phone. So if I have an idea, I can sing the melody or the harmony, or I can even sing the chords by sort of arpeggiating the chord or just saying the chord, like saying the name of the chord, like, C minor add 6, sus 9 or something. I can just say it and then quickly get it down on my phone. And then later I can bring that into Logic, which Logic is a digital audio workstation. It's like GarageBand. It's just a platform where you can put sounds in there in linear time. So I'll usually compose it in Logic and make it sound like I want it to sound. And then I will transcribe that into Sibelius, which is a notation program that makes the parts that we all look at and hold and sing or play. So that second act of actually writing it down is a way of writing another draft of the piece and fixing things, but it's also a way of making it all look beautiful and make sense. And, maybe 5% of things will change in that process, but most of it happens in Logic from notes that I make in my phone. I used to try to write it down. Like if I had an idea, I used to try to get a, pencil and staff paper. It was gone after I drew 5 lines and a treble clef. Like it was gone. So I just needed something faster to be like, oh, and then I can go and write that down really quick. So yeah, there's a lot of technology involved. I mean, I do not understand how brilliant the composers of the 19th century and before had to be to get that all down before they lost their idea. I can't do it. So clearly I would not have survived as a composer in the 19th century.
Fair enough. Awesome. Something a little off of composition, I guess, for a second. Some of the questions students are asking, what's your favorite type of music, favorite song, maybe other favorite composers of yours?
Oh yeah, I have a long list, but my favorite kind of music is not a genre. My favorite kind of music is anything that gives me chills. So there's a term for that. It's a French term called frisson, Frisson. I'm actually consider making a podcast about this and like having guests on. Like I would have Dave on and I would say like, all right, what is the 10 seconds of music that gives you chills? So like, can you come up with one? If I ask you, I'll let you think about this for,
I got one. I mean,
what do you
like
got?
Enigma Variations, the Nimrod. I mean,
There
that
you go.
I get,
Now, where the big moment?
yeah. Well, there's two, like I mean, both of them really towards the end there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the fake out, and then
Yep.
there's the big moment.
Yeah.
So like that's my favorite kind of music is the chills. But if I were going to like start naming pieces and genres and composers, then I'm gonna break it into groups. So if we're talking about like orchestral composers, then Aaron Copland is at the top of my list. Appalachian Spring, Billy the Kid, Fanfare for the Common Man, Third Symphony, Rodeo, Holst, both Holst suites, the Planets, St. Paul's Suite, love Holst. Tchaikovsky is basically my favorite romantic composer, everything that he's ever done. Wagner and Mahler as well, but selected things. And then, of course, if we're going to do film score, which is a big deal to me, then we're going to do John Williams. Again, basically everything ever, but specifically E.T. and Empire and Raiders and Close Encounters. Bernard Herrmann, Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho, Cape Fear. Got to do those. And Leonard Bernstein on the Waterfront, of course, and West Side Story. No brainer. If we're going to do rock and roll, we're going to go Led Zeppelin, specifically Led Zeppelin 4, but pretty much all of it. But early Led Zeppelin and Led Zeppelin 4. Sting, and Police and solo work, everything. U2, again, everything, but their early stuff, specifically like Joshua Tree and Achtung Baby. Folk stuff, Sufjan Stevens, if you know him, super cool, super weird. Mostly his folk stuff, some electronic stuff. Granger, if we're doing band, love Granger. I only like so much of his reels and stuff. So like Children's March all day long, Lincolnshire all day, not so much Molly on the Shore. Samuel Barber, big fan. Aerosmith, huge Aerosmith fan.
Yeah.
Rock and roll. And I see your Queen poster. Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Elton John. Yeah. So I don't really care about the genre. I care about the connection and the chills. Anything that you want to rewind and be like, woo, what was that? Let me hear that again. That's my favorite kind of music. Because really, why else are you making music?
Tell me that French word again. I'm gonna steal that because we talk about the goosebump moments all the time. So
frisson, Frisson.
All right, I'm stealing.
I might call that my podcast, the Frisson podcast.
Awesome.
You can be my first guest. We'll talk about Queen.
I love it. I'm in. We got a couple more minutes here, so here's another question before we wrap up. You set aside specifically to compose, like you set time aside specifically to compose, or do you write when an idea inspires you more?
No, I have to, man. I have many jobs and kids and family. Like before the world blew up, I would write after 9 p.m. to 11, like that little window in there, most nights. And then since the world blew up, I've been writing from like 6 a.m. to 7:30, just because I'm up and no one else is. So that's a good time to do it as well. But yeah, you have to carve it out because between, my public school job and the community orchestra and the publishing side of writing music, like I don't have a big name publisher. I self-publish. So there's actually a lot of administration and logistics that goes into running a website and a business and getting orders shipped and taking orders and figuring out payments. And so that's like a job too. So no, I carve out a time every day where, not every day, but like 5 days a week where I write. You have to, because if I only wrote when I was super inspired, like that's amateur hour, you're not gonna get anything done. You've got to keep working at just a little bit every day. It's just like anything else. If you actually want any results, you have to just keep doing a little bit every day. Like you can't lift weights once every 4 weeks and hope to see some kind of gains, right? You can't play your instrument and practice your scales once a month and hope that you're going to get better. Like it doesn't work that way. So if it's important, set aside some time for it.
Awesome. That's great advice. You talked about being really interested in film music, and have you written any film scores or music for films?
Yes, I have. I did a movie called A Hope Without Walls by a Michigan director named Paul Schneider. I also wrote a full-length orchestral score to Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, and we performed it in 2016 live. So we had the movie up on a big screen behind us. The movie doesn't have any music. That was like a choice that they did, and so I was in love with it. So I just wrote a score, but I wrote it in the style of Bernard Herrmann. So like the music that he would have written, I think, in my mind. So I studied his scores for North by Northwest and Psycho and Vertigo, and I took sort of his voicings and his ideas about orchestration and some of his little techniques, and I wrote my own melodies and harmonies and made music that worked for that. And then we did it live with an audience, and it was super fun. And that was great because I didn't have a director telling me like, I don't like that music for that scene, or change it, because I don't I don't do well with that kind of critique. I'm very thin-skinned about my music. So that was how I knew like this was never going to work if I wanted to move to Los Angeles and like score films as a living. I was way too sensitive. You have to be really tough and treat it like a job to just crank out music. Those guys are pretty impressive.
Awesome. Well, I got one last question, then we'll wrap up. This is just one for me. You had mentioned before that you were working on a piece with an audio track, like a nature track. I don't know if you could speak about that piece a little bit, just because there's a lot of composers using videos and audio and technology with the band and orchestra piece. Now it's kind of an interesting newer thing.
Yeah, and I'm actually super terrified of this piece because I don't know how to do it. But the idea seems really cool to me to have this audio track. The track itself is called Park Tracks. The National Park Service went out into the field in all these national parks and recorded audio from the park. So there's just all these cool indigenous birds and bugs and sounds and nature, and it's super cool. And I wanted to write a piece of music that would weave in and out of it. And then the performance would incorporate the electronics and the acoustic instruments and see how that works. But I actually am super scared of it. I don't know how I'm going to do that. So I actually don't know if I'm going to do that. I know I know Brad at Woodhaven wants to be the lead commissioner on it. I don't think I've told him yet, like that I don't know how to do it. So we'll see. I might kind of back burner that for a little while until I can figure it out.
Sure.
But that's you got to take some risks. That's part of the deal is taking big risks, and sometimes it works out, and if it doesn't, whatever, no one has to hear it.
Fair enough. Well, it's 4 o'clock, so we're right on schedule here. Really appreciate you spending the hour with us and talking with our students and parents and community members. And this video will live on so we can send it up for kids that weren't able to check in and watch it later. So thanks
That
for
was my
spending an hour.
pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to see you, even virtually.
You too, man.
We'll be able to get together sometime in the near future.
Yeah, if we're allowed to, absolutely. And I just want to say real quick too, like I owe a lot to Rochester Community Schools and the music programs that supported me when I was, just getting into this and really interested in it. So I'm really glad to see and hear that those programs are still super healthy and expanding and being supported by the community and the school board and the admin and obviously the teachers. Really stellar staff there too. So keep it up. You guys are doing it right.
Awesome. Thanks again. And Mr. Owen let me know earlier, we're going to take a listen to on our way out once we're done the Trip the Light Fantastic recording from the Rochester High School Band and Choir. So if folks want to stick around and take a listen, you can hear one of these pieces. So thanks a lot for doing this today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. My pleasure. Take
All
care.
right. Take care.